Okay, so today we're going to be taking this deep dive into pretty heavy material. It's the case surrounding William Mozingo.
Yeah.
And you might have heard it called the 4 Days of Hell trial.
Right.
And unfortunately, that's a pretty accurate description.
Yeah.
We're going to be looking at what happened during those 4 days and the lasting effects on the victim, Chloe Jones. And
yeah, it's a tough case. Essentially, William Mozingo, he ended up pleading guilty to kidnapping and assaulting Chloe Jones.
Right.
Holding her captive, causing her just unimaginable suffering over these 4 days.
Yeah, and, you know, we actually have access to some pretty incredible material for this deep dive. We have Chloe's own victim impact statement.
How?
And we have one from her mother as well.
Over and over again and told me, don't pass out. If you pass out, I'll cut your throat. All that time, all I could think about was my son and that I would never see him again. In fact, you promised me that I would never see him again and that I would never make it out of this alive. You held me under the constant threat of death by holding a knife to my throat. What happened to me over the course of those 4 days has changed me forever, not only mentally, but physically. Because of you, I have a traumatic brain injury that I will forever suffer the effects of. Because of you, I battle anxiety and PTSD, night terrors. Even in my sleep, I get no rest. It is an effort just to go outside, constantly fearing that this will happen to me again. But know that I will continue to live my life. You no longer have power over me, and I am the one in control. After this day, you will go to prison, and I will go back to my son, my family, and those who love me. I will continue to grow and live and heal despite what you've done. Your Honor, he has done these horrendous things before, and he will do it again. I don't ever want him to have the opportunity to hurt another person. He needs to go to prison for as long as possible. 25 years is not enough. He will still be a strong man in 25 years and still capable of hurting another. No time will ever be enough, but Your Honor, I have faith that you will hear my story and the state's argument and make the right decision. Thank you.
Thank you.
Your Honor, at this time, I believe Chloe's mom is going to take the city.
Okay.
Thank you, Your Honor. I'm not prepared for this.
Okay, so we're going to need you to state your, first of all, make sure that that light is blue there.
No worries. Hi, my
There you
name's
go.
Jessie Barham. I'm Chloe Jones's mom.
All right, could you spell your last name?
Barham.
All right, and then I know when doing something like this, anxiety and all that can get in there, so just try to keep it a little slower and tell
Yes,
me what
ma'am.
it is you want to share. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much again. I did not prepare a statement because of the fact that I did not expect things to go this way today. The fact of the matter is that this man should not have even been out. He should not have even been free, because this is not the first time that you have abducted a woman, held her captive, and tortured her for days on end. This is not the second time that you've abducted a woman, held her captive, and tortured her. This is not the third time that you have abducted a woman, held her captive, and tortured her. This is actually the fourth time that you will be convicted of abducting a woman, holding her captive, and torturing her. You should never have been out on the streets in the first place in order to harm my daughter. And I pray to God, under these circumstances, that, Your Honor, you hear my daughter's story and know his story. Because it's not it's not if he will offend again, it's when he will offend again. And when in 25 years, he will be still a strong man, and probably stronger, because they lift weights on those in those freaking jailhouses, and he will be a danger to society. He waited 2 months after his second conviction and serving 18 months in prison. He waited 2 months before he offended again. 2 months before he kidnapped another woman and tortured her. My daughter should never have been your victim. You poured gasoline on my child and threatened to burn her alive. You beat her over the head with a baseball bat. You beat her from head to toe for days. You punched her in her face so many times over the course of 4 days that she has paralysis on her left side of her face. She couldn't even open her eyes. She had blood dripping out of her ears. She had a brain bleed and was in ICU for 3 days. You did this to my daughter. You did this to my child. And you're not a man. That's not what a man does. A man protects women. You are evil. You're a villain. And you should never be allowed to see the light of day ever again, because you are a predator. You have an MO, and you've proven it time and time and time and time again. This will be your 4th conviction for the exact same offense. Oh, I'll say it again. 4th time. 4th time. Your Honor, my daughter is never going to be the same. She can't retain any new information because of she has a traumatic brain injury. She cannot even retain new information. She as far as working, she's not able to get a job, not only because of the physical, but because of the psychological damage that has been done to my child. She's going to suffer probably way longer than him, which is not fair. This wasn't a domestic violence sort of thing. This was not a back and forth. This was my daughter 100% of the time absolutely victimized and submissive to him, terrified for her life, as he promised that she was never going to get out of there. He promised her that she was going to die at his hands. He should be getting attempted murder charges with as many times as he strangled her and dared her to pass out because he was going to cut her throat if she did. He broke her arm and her finger just because she was trying to defend herself from a baseball bat to her head. Facial fractures. Yeah, you did. We got the medical records. Your Honor, all I ask is that you do what all the other courts and all the other judges before you did not do. Protect every single woman that he could get his hands on eventually. Your Honor, you have the power and you are within the law to put him away until he is no longer a danger to anyone, until he is feeble, until he is wetting his diapers. You don't scare me, William.
Ma'am, just stay focused on talking to me, okay?
Yes, ma'am. I apologize. The other judges before you barely gave him a slap on the wrist, and even 25 years at this point, in my opinion, would be a slap on the wrist, considering the fact that he has proven that he loves to do this. He has over 400 videotapes of my daughter being abused by him. He videotaped it because he's that sick. I don't know if he was going to sell her or sell the videos for some smut stuff online. I don't know, but I do know that anyone who takes 400 plus videos of my child getting assaulted violently, and threatened, her life threatened hundreds of times, strangled a dozen times at least. Anyone who has that in them to want to videotape that, there's something deeply, deeply wrong with that person. And that is the kind of person that has proven he cannot be allowed out in polite society, because that's just guaranteeing that someone else is going to have to go through what my daughter and countless, there's no telling how many girls he's done this to. My daughter just was strong enough to come today and be willing to testify, and that's the only reason why he pled guilty today, because he didn't want her to get on the stand and testify against him, because he knew that that would be damning. And I mean that. I'm not cursing.
Thank you.
That's all I have to say.
The sentence that we got, it could have been less. Thank God that it wasn't. So I'm just glad that I get to close this chapter and, hopefully take matters in my own hands and actually have Lay actually just be able to heal. Yeah, heal and see the light underneath, or the tunnel. The tunnel. And the thing is.
Yeah, well, I was very pleased because it just so happens that, like I mentioned in my statement, that he's been convicted of this more than once, charged even more, and I'm telling how many people that this has happened to before that he didn't get caught. So I was very happy knowing that he's going to be an old man when he gets out. It's going to be at least 25 years before anybody has to worry about this ever again from him.
Okay, so today we're going to be taking this deep dive into pretty heavy material. It's the case surrounding William Mozingo.
Yeah.
And you might have heard it called the 4 Days of Hell trial.
Right.
And unfortunately, that's a pretty accurate description.
Yeah.
We're going to be looking at what happened during those 4 days and the lasting effects on the victim, Chloe Jones. And
yeah, it's a tough case. Essentially, William Mozingo, he ended up pleading guilty to kidnapping and assaulting Chloe Jones.
Right.
Holding her captive, causing her just unimaginable suffering over these 4 days.
Yeah, and we actually have access to some pretty incredible material for this deep dive. We have Chloe's own victim impact statement.
How?
And we have one from her mother as well. Okay. And yeah, just reading their words, you really get a sense of the raw emotion and the long-term trauma.
Yeah, I can imagine. One thing that really makes this case especially disturbing is just the premeditation. This wasn't something that just happened in the moment. Mozingo actually videotaped a lot of the abuse.
Yeah.
Like, there were over 400 recordings.
Oh, wow. That detail is really chilling.
Yeah.
To think about that level of premeditation is really hard to comprehend. What are the psychological implications of, documenting the abuse like that?
Yeah, it's a complex question. But I think some of the things it points to is, just a really strong desire for power and control, maybe even a twisted sense of pride in the things that he's doing.
Right.
It's also possible, right, that he was making these recordings to watch later,
Oh, right.
Like a really disturbing need to kind of relive what he did.
Right. And, to make matters worse, this wasn't even Mozingo's first defense.
Really?
He actually has a history of similar crimes. It's hard to believe, but this was his 4th conviction for kidnapping and torturing women.
Wow. So this is a pattern of behavior.
Yeah, unfortunately it is. And that really raises some serious questions about how he was able to continue offending like this even after being convicted before.
Right.
It's definitely something we'll want to talk more about later. How can society do a better job of protecting potential victims?
Yeah.
What do we do about these repeat offenders?
Right.
But for now, let's kind of go back to the legal proceedings in this specific case.
Yeah.
So Mozingo, he pleaded guilty.
Right.
He did.
Yeah.
What happened next?
So he pleaded guilty, and that meant that Chloe Jones didn't have to testify.
Right.
Which is a really good thing, because can you imagine having to go through all of that again?
Oh, absolutely not.
So, yeah, he spared her that. And then he was sentenced. He got 14 to 17 and a half years in prison.
Okay. Yeah, that sentence must have been really hard for Chloe and her family, especially given his history.
For sure.
We mentioned the victim impact statements earlier. What struck you the most about Chloe's account of those 4 days?
Well, what really stood out is just the terror. Just this constant terror that she lived with.
Yeah.
She talked about how he would hold a knife to her throat and just tell her over and over, don't pass out. If you pass out, I'll cut your throat.
Oh, my gosh.
Just the psychological torture, almost worse, than even the physical abuse.
Right.
To live with that constant fear and never knowing what's going to happen next.
Yeah.
But she also talks about, the just relentless physical abuse, the beatings with a baseball bat, punches to the face. He strangled her repeatedly.
Yeah. Her description of the physical injuries alone is just so hard to hear.
Yeah.
She suffered a traumatic brain injury. She has trouble retaining new information.
Yeah, and you can only imagine how those injuries affect every part of her life. Even the simplest things must be incredibly difficult.
Absolutely. And, we know that her mother provided a victim impact statement as well.
Right.
What was the focus of hers?
Hers is just, I mean, it's incredibly raw and emotional.
Yeah.
She's furious, understandably so, not only about what her daughter went through, but about the fact that this is his fourth conviction for this type of crime.
Oh, my gosh.
She actually directly addressed him in the courtroom, called him a predator, and said that he was going to remain a danger to society even after he serves his sentence.
That must have been an incredibly intense moment in the courtroom.
I'm sure it was.
And then, just to add another layer of complexity to all of this, Mozingo actually addressed the court himself and offered an apology.
He did. Yeah, he did.
And in his apology, he blamed his actions on his drug use, claiming he was fueled by meth during those 4 days.
Oh, wow.
So this really brings up the whole question about the role of addiction in criminal behavior.
Right.
It's a topic that always causes debate.
Yeah.
How should the legal system approach these cases where substance abuse seems to be a factor?
Yeah, it's a complicated issue for sure. You have to balance individual accountability
Right.
with the fact that addiction is incredibly powerful. Was the crime premeditated, or was it, just bad judgment because he was high?
Right.
These are tough questions that have to be looked at very carefully in each case.
It sounds like there's not one easy answer.
Right.
Right. Every case is going to have its own specific circumstances.
Absolutely. Yeah. There are so many factors at play, and you really have to approach each case with nuance. And you need to understand both the legal and the psychological aspects.
Right. And in Mozingo's case, he decided to plead guilty.
He did.
What are some of the reasons someone might decide to do that?
Well, I think there are a few different possibilities. It could be a way to take responsibility for what they did.
Right.
Maybe show remorse. It can also be a strategic decision, trying to avoid a trial.
Oh, okay.
Which might end up with a longer sentence.
So I may be hoping for a little bit of leniency.
Maybe. It might be hoping that admitting guilt will lead to a lighter sentence. But it could also be about trying to control the narrative,
Right.
A guilty plea, it can be a way to kind of manage how the public sees the crime and the person who committed it.
Of course, no matter the reason, it doesn't undo the harm that's been done.
Exactly.
The guilty plea doesn't magically heal all of the trauma that Chloe Jones went through.
That's right. And I think that leads us to a question that's probably on your mind, too. How do we stop these kinds of horrible crimes from happening?
Yeah.
Especially with repeat offenders.
Yeah,
what can we do to, protect potential victims?
Yeah, it's a question that really haunts this entire case, and we're going to need to explore it a lot more. But first, I think we should really take a look at the long-term impact of those 4 days on Chloe Jones.
Okay.
Her story is a powerful reminder of the resilience of the human spirit,
Right.
but also, the deep, deep scars that this kind of trauma leaves behind.
Right. I think it's important to really dig into what Chloe Jones went through during those 4 days.
Right.
Her victim impact statement gives us this chilling firsthand account of the torture.
Right.
The physical and psychological torture that Mozingo put her through. It's hard to read.
Yeah.
But it really gives us this crucial insight into the lasting impact of trauma.
Yeah, reading her words, you really do get a sense of just how terrified she was.
Right.
She talks about him holding a knife to her throat, just saying over and over again, don't pass out. If you pass out, I'll cut your throat. I mean, that level of constant threat,
Right.
it just must have been absolutely paralyzing.
Absolutely. The psychological torment, almost as disturbing as the physical abuse.
Right.
Just imagine living with that kind of fear all the time, never knowing what was going to happen next.
Right, right.
Her statement also details, just the constant physical abuse.
Yeah.
The beatings with the baseball bat, punches to the face. He strangled her over and over again.
And if that wasn't horrifying enough, her mother, in her own statement, reveals that Mozingo actually poured gasoline on Chloe.
Wow.
And threatened to burn her alive.
Oh my gosh.
It's just hard to understand that level of cruelty.
It really is. I mean, it's clear that he was really going out of his way to inflict as much pain and terror as possible.
Yeah.
He even broke her arm and finger when she tried to fight back.
Yeah.
This goes so far beyond a simple assault. This is, systematic torture meant to completely break her.
Yeah. It's heartbreaking to think about, the lasting impact of this kind of trauma.
Right.
And in her statement, Chloe mentions a traumatic brain injury that she suffered as a result of the abuse.
Right.
I know we talked about this a little bit before,
Yeah.
but could you explain in a little bit more detail, how a TBI can impact someone's life?
Yeah, a traumatic brain injury can have these really devastating effects. A lot of times they're invisible.
Right.
It can affect memory, it can affect your thinking, even personality.
Wow.
Simple tasks, things like remembering appointments, being able to focus on a conversation,
Right.
following instructions, all of that can become incredibly difficult.
Yeah.
And that can make it really hard to keep a job, have relationships, even do everyday things.
Absolutely. And, it's not just the physical injuries that are so debilitating. The psychological trauma is profound as well.
Yeah.
Chloe mentions struggling with PTSD, anxiety, night terrors. Can you talk a little bit about what it's like to live with these invisible wounds?
Sure. Post-traumatic stress disorder can show up in so many different ways.
Yeah.
Flashbacks, nightmares, you might feel like you're constantly on edge, just feeling numb emotionally.
Right.
Imagine, constantly reliving the trauma, feeling unsafe even when you're in places that should be safe, struggling to control your emotions.
Right.
It can make you feel like you can never really escape what happened.
Right. It's just a sobering reminder
Yeah.
that healing from this kind of trauma, it's a long and difficult process.
It really is.
And, a lot of times it requires ongoing support
Absolutely.
and access to resources.
And what makes this case even more disturbing is that this wasn't a one-time thing. Like we talked about earlier, this was Mozingo's 4th conviction for this type of crime. So this pattern of behavior, it raises serious questions about, how our justice system handles repeat offenders.
Right.
How do we do a better job protecting the people who could be their next victims?
It's a really crucial point, and I know it's something that a lot of our listeners are probably thinking about too.
Yeah.
Why wasn't this guy stopped sooner? Right. What can we do to recognize these patterns and address them before they turn into something so horrific?
It's a complicated problem, and there's no easy answer. I think it requires a combination of things. Early intervention,
Okay.
effective rehab programs,
Right.
and a justice system that really takes these repeat offenders seriously.
Right. And it's not just about punishing the person after the fact, right?
Right.
It's about stopping these crimes from happening to begin with.
Absolutely. We need to shift our focus, Instead of reacting, we need to be thinking about prevention. That means investing in things that get to the root of the problem. Things like mental health services, substance abuse treatment, programs that help people learn how to have healthy relationships and deal with conflict.
Yeah. And I think we also have to think about how our attitudes and beliefs as a society contribute to violence against women.
Absolutely.
We need to challenge misogyny, promote gender equality, create a culture of respect and consent. All of that's critical for prevention.
I totally agree. It's about creating a society where violence is not tolerated.
Right.
And where victims feel safe to come forward and get help without feeling judged or scared of what might happen.
Right. And, that brings us back to this question of addiction.
Right.
And how it played a role in this case. Yeah, Mozingo blamed his actions on meth use.
Right.
It's a tough thing to talk about, but we need to understand this complicated relationship between addiction and criminal behavior.
Absolutely. Addiction can really cloud judgment. It can make you more impulsive.
Right.
And lead to behavior that you wouldn't normally engage in.
Right.
But it's crucial to remember that, just because you're addicted to something, it doesn't mean you're not responsible for your actions.
Yeah, it's a really fine line to walk.
It is.
We have to hold people accountable for the crimes they commit.
Right.
But also recognize that addiction is a really complex disease.
Right.
That needs treatment.
Right. And it needs compassion.
Right. So it seems like we need kind of a multifaceted approach, right?
Yeah.
We need to help the person with their addiction while still holding them accountable for the things that they've done.
That's right.
But what about the victims?
Right.
How can we support survivors like Chloe Jones?
Yeah.
They're left to pick up the pieces and figure out how to heal.
That's a really important question. Chloe's story shows us that the impact of trauma, it doesn't end when the person is sentenced.
Right.
Healing can take years, even a lifetime, and it requires support, resources, and understanding.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've spent a good amount of time talking about the details of what Chloe Jones went through, the failures that kind of let this happen.
Yeah.
And this whole complicated thing with addiction and crime.
Right.
But I want to shift gears a little bit here and talk about, healing, support for survivors of trauma.
Yeah, that's really important. It's not over when the court case is done.
Right, right.
As we've heard from Chloe, the impact of trauma, it doesn't just go away.
Absolutely.
It can be a long road to healing.
Yeah, and in her statement, she talks about still struggling with things.
Right.
Like retaining new information.
Yeah.
Fear and anxiety.
Yeah.
What kind of support is out there for people dealing with these things?
Well, there's a lot, actually, both nationwide and locally. Support groups are great because they provide a safe space for survivors
Okay.
to connect with others who get it.
Right.
Then there's counseling, which can give professional guidance, and coping mechanisms, therapy that's specifically for trauma.
Yeah.
That's really helpful. And there are organizations just dedicated to supporting victims of violence.
Wow. So it sounds like it's really a multifaceted approach
Exact.
to deal with, the injuries, the trauma, and putting your life back together after something so horrible.
Yeah, and everyone's journey is different.
Right.
There's no one solution.
Of course. So how can someone even find the right resources for their situation?
That's a good question. It can be overwhelming.
Yeah.
There are some great organizations that act like hubs for info and support.
Okay.
The National Sexual Assault Hotline's available 24/7.
Wow.
They can connect you to local resources.
That's great.
RAINN, the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network, is another amazing one.
Yeah, I've heard of them.
They have a ton of information online and also offer support.
It's good to know those are out. There's like a lifeline for survivors.
It is, and it's important to say that getting help is strong, not weak.
Right, of course.
To admit you need help takes a lot of courage.
Yeah, no shame in asking for help at all.
It's the first step to healing.
That's a powerful message. Now, for those of us who haven't gone through this,
Right.
what can we do? How can we support survivors?
I think awareness is key.
Okay.
We have to learn about abuse, the power dynamics, and challenge bad attitudes.
Right.
We have to create a culture of respect.
So it's more than just knowing about it.
Absolutely.
It's about taking action. How?
Lots of ways. Support organizations fighting violence.
Cool.
Financially or by volunteering, advocate for stronger laws.
Right.
Speak out, challenge people who dismiss these issues.
Right.
And most importantly, believe survivors when they tell their stories.
Right. Listen without judgment and support them.
Exactly.
It's about changing the narrative, the culture, creating a world without violence.
It's on all of us to make that happen.
This whole time I keep thinking about Chloe Jones's strength.
Yeah.
After everything, she wants to heal, rebuild, move forward.
It's amazing, a testament to how strong people can be.
Yeah, a reminder that even in darkness, there's hope and healing. Right. As we wrap up, what's the one thing you want people to remember?
Believe survivors, support their healing, help build a world free from violence.
We all have a part to play.
We do.
And if anyone listening needs help, remember there are resources. You're not alone.